Thanks for joining us. My name is 𝗧𝗶𝗺𝗀. I'm one of the 28 region managers that helps cover the United States and Canada. Welcome to you. Welcome also to those that are joining us from our simulcast locations all around the U.S. and up into Canada as well. We're glad to have you. Thank you for being with us. I started Precision Planting back in 2009. And so this marks my 15th winter conference. But it's the first time from this vantage point, from the presenter's seat. And it's been very humbling as Matt and I have thought through the content of this particular session to think through kind of the legacy that has been brought up behind, all the things that I've learned from presenters in the past. They've brought a lot of perspective to me over the years on how to approach the field. And so we hope that we can maybe add a bit of value to that perspective as well. And I want to start with just that, a little bit of perspective. 58 days. Okay, 58 days to what? Okay, this is the number of work days, excluding weekends and holidays, between now and April 15th. Your blood pressure increased just a little, maybe a little. Now, for the guys that are down south, they're saying we got less than half of that, right? For the guys up north, you're saying we're okay. For some of you, you're saying, what's a weekend, right? So you've got a few more days. But what we know is this: there's a finite amount of time between now and when this happens. Think through this with me. If you're running a 16-row, 30-inch planter, putting down 34,000 seeds per acre, running 5 miles per hour. Now, I realize that is a snail's pace for a good number of you. But in this scenario, dropping 14.3 seeds per row per second. Now, think through what that means. At $375 a bag and 80,000 kernels per bag, every single seed costs you just over 0.04 of a cent. Doesn't seem like much until you figure what that is per second. Every second, that planter is dropping $1.07. $1.07. Every minute, that planter is put down over $64. Every hour is $3,800. Now, here's the thing. I know this group, and I know a lot of you are putting a lot more weight on the planter pass than just seeds. So let's add to this. Let's say you're putting down 10 gallons of 32% UAN. Let's add 5 gallons of 1034O. You've just increased by $900, over $900. So in 58 days, you're going to be sitting back in that tractor seat, getting ready to put over $4,700 per hour into the soil, hoping to reap the rewards in the fall, right? And so that is why we hope that the majority of you will join us in the next couple of months for what we might call a preseason counseling session or a 2020 monitor refresher clinic, okay? This is where you come from all around, and you're going to join us, and we're going to do two things. The first thing that's got to be said at every meeting is, it's been 10 months since we last looked at it. Let us help you remember what this is telling you, right? But before we can go much further than that, we have to do something else. We have to make sure that this 2020 is a lean, mean data crunching machine, which means we got to delete the last 4+ years of data that you haven't deleted yet so that it doesn't fill up partway through the season, right? And as we go through this process, the dealer and the RM will work our way through the spaghetti mat of cords down on the ground, and we're going to begin to ask this question to 3 different groups of growers. The first group of growers, we're going to ask, do you have that data saved? Is it backed up? The first group says, yep, already got it saved. And that tells me something. This grower has probably done something with the information from the time they left the tractor cab in the spring until now, right? They've done something with it. There's a second, more common group. Do you have that data saved? Well, I'm not sure. You have a USB? Okay, here's the USB stick. We now save that data to that USB, and then I'm going to say, maybe don't delete the data until you get it home and you know it's saved to your computer, because the probability is high that that USB ends up in the lint trap instead of in the computer where it was meant to go, right? And then there's a last group. It's not as many, but I get this every year. I don't think I need it. You can go ahead and delete it. I say, what? Right? To a guy that works in precision ag, that's almost sacrilegious. You don't need your data. What do you mean? But what the last two groups tells us is this, is when we interact with data, a lot of us maybe feel like this guy here, who found that random set of keys laying around. He doesn't know what lock it goes to, but it probably isn't wise to get rid of it, and so it's going to go into that miscellaneous junk drawer that we all have sitting in the office, right? And so what Matt and I hope to do through this session here is think through with you, how can we change the perspective on how we view that information and put it to work for us this coming season?
So my name is Matt Nelson. I am a software engineer here, and I lead the Panorama team. And being a software engineer puts me in a somewhat awkward position for a presentation like this. First of all, it shows that I don't always know what I'm doing with technology. But secondly, it puts me between some much more powerful forces here. On the one side, you've got the agronomists who are figuring out what are the measurements that matter. And you've got the mechanical engineers figuring out how to take those measurements quickly, efficiently, and accurately. On the other side, you've got growers like yourselves who are out there making the decisions in the field in real time to put those measurements to use. In between, that's where I am, building the software that helps bridge that gap. But let's be honest, nobody asked the bridge for its perspective. So why am I here? Well, I'm here because software is really that glue, it's that bridge. It's what keeps the data out of the junk drawer, because if we don't have a way to use it, it's not very useful. It's that, I don't know, let's just throw it away kind of attitude. So I want to talk through three questions. The first is, what do we mean by data in the first place? The second is, where am I going to put it if not in the junk drawer? And the third, how do I get value out of it once I put it there? So let's start at the foundations. The foundations are the hardware you put on your machine, the precision planning modules that you've bought and installed. They are top of the line, best in class sensors and controllers that are sending back signals to you all of the time. Every module on every row is sending 5 measurements per second at you. That's thousands of measurements coming at you in a flood, more than you could possibly process on your own. So you need some tools to help you out with that. And the first tool is the Gen3 2020. As you may know, as you probably have experienced, the Gen3 is really there to get out of the way. It brings those modules into focus, but it doesn't force you to actually look at them. Instead, what you do is you tell us, the monitor, what targets you want to hit. And then you don't worry about it because the monitor will let you know if you stop hitting those targets. You can focus on the job at hand. Meanwhile, the monitor is going to keep track of those measurements. It's going to store them, it's going to keep records, so you can come back later and you can ask the big questions when you're no longer focused on the next second and instead you're focused on your whole operation. But how are we going to view those? That's where Panorama comes in. Panorama gathers all of those records that the 2020 is keeping, and it brings them together into one place in the cloud so that you can access that easily wherever you are, whenever you want, without needing to worry. It's a very powerful idea, and it's easy to underestimate just how powerful it is. It means that when you have a question about your field, you can go back and you can look at it, and you can see every single measurement that any piece of hardware on that equipment ever measured in that field. You can see how the equipment was configured when it measured that. You can see down to the voltage of that sensor at that moment in time. It's a ton of data and unlocks a ton of possibilities, but we're going to need some tools to wrangle that. And the two big ones that you're going to have at your disposal are your phone and your laptop or your desktop. Your phone on iOS and Android is going to give you access to the quick insights. It's going to let you quickly evaluate what you want to see. You still see the same maps, the same metrics, pixel for pixel like they were on the 2020, but now suited towards quick answers. And if you want to dive deep, if you want to step back and look at your whole operation, you can go to panorama.ag and you can, again, see all of those same maps and metrics, but optimized for a slightly different use case, now where you want to dive deep and look at everything in depth. And we know that it's not just you on your operation. There's multiple people involved, all working together to get you to the end of the season. And so we wanted to make sure it was simple for you to work with them. And so when you start with Panorama, the first thing you're going to be asked to do is to create an operation. And once you've created an operation, you'll be the owner of it. And as the owner, you'll be responsible for paying a $500 a year subscription to keep it active. But it's only those $500. There's no additional per acre or per megabyte charges, no charges for adding new features or for inviting new people. You can feel free to invite your cousin or your brother or your dealer or whoever it is that's going to bring that operation to the next level at no charge to them and no charge to you. There's no limits to the number of people you can bring in, and there's no limits to the number of operations that you can join as someone invited. And because we know that a lot of you work across multiple platforms, we've partnered with John Deere Ops Center, we've partnered with Climate Field View and Granular Insights and Total Acre to make sure that you get the data wherever you want to go without needing to worry about it. Panorama will automatically synchronize that so you don't have to think about it. So that answers the first two questions. It tells us what is this data that we're worried about? It's all of those measurements. And where are we going to put it? We answered that. But the question is now, how do we get use out of it? And there's really 4 categories of use, 4 strategies that we build software to enable you to get the most out of your data. The first, I've already kind of alluded to with the 2020. It's expect to hit specific targets. You tell us what you want to be doing, where you expect that measurement to be, and we'll keep an eye on it for you so you don't need to pay attention. We'll alert you if something goes wrong, but otherwise, you can keep focusing on the task at hand. Second, there are times when you need to pause and make a decision. So we want to anticipate what the question is, what the decision is that you need to make, and make sure that data is ready to hand, easy to answer that question. Third, when you want to dive deep, when you want to learn the full lesson of the season, there's going to be wins and losses. And you want to make sure that you can convert those into better expectations for next season. So we want to give you all the tools you need to understand why you won, why there's better yield here and worse yield there. And finally, we want to make sure everyone stays connected very simply, very easily, without you needing to think about, oh, so-and-so needs some data, let's coordinate to get that to go there. No, Panorama will take care of that for you. And with that, let's go ahead and turn to the first one, and Eric will tell us about it.
So as we think about the expectations that we're setting, I think it's important to think through what do we base those expectations off of. So this takes me back to the beginning of my career here, 2009. In the old farm show booth, here's what our conversation centered around. It was around a finger meter. How do we get another 2% out of that meter by repowering it? How do we manage that vacuum meter more accurately to get that extra 2%? Air Force had just been introduced for the first time that year. And so for the first time, we were having conversations about things like ground contact and margin. But fast forward, and singulation is now a solved problem. Singulation has been solved, any size, any shape. This shouldn't be something I have to waste my time thinking about as I go. Downforce as a whole, ground contact, is a solved problem. By going to row-by-row control, this is now very much taken care of. So now this establishes what we should expect. You should expect 99% singulation or better until the petrified piece of seed treatment makes it from the central fill out through the tube and into your seed pool. At that point, we'll say, hey, heads up, look at this, right? You should expect spacing to stay above 95% until it's not. And then we'll alert you to that. And then you start to have conversations like, Mitch, he was my dealer at the time, Mitch, why didn't you get out and fix it? 4 rounds in a row, it was showing you there was a problem. He says, Eric, I did. I got out once every time for 4 rounds before I finally figured out that the little nut that increased the tension on that hopper latch had come loose. Tighten it up and the problem goes away, right? This sets our expectation. Now, we can also expect to learn things that maybe we didn't see before. And I go back to this example. This was 2016. I'm riding in the buddy seat with a grower in eastern Iowa, and he said, Eric, I can't run any faster than 5.3 miles per hour. I thought that kind of a very oddly specific number, 5.3. He said, yeah, let me show you. He speeds up to 5.4, and his good ride drops. His spacing follows. Okay? So now we switch over to his downforce map, and the load pin now shows us an odd pattern underground that we hadn't expected to see before. We didn't know what it was. And it took some time, but what I noticed is as we got out of the tractor and I started walking through the field, and one part of that field, I'm standing on firm soil. 10 feet further, my boot's 3 inches deep. And we start to excavate away the loose soil, and what we come to find out is the new field cultivator on the operation hadn't been set properly. It wasn't deep enough, and it was creating ridges underground that we before couldn't see. So this establishes what we begin to expect. But now I'm going to hand it back to Matt to tell us what should we expect to see coming.
So when I listen to you talk, Eric, I'm hearing just how high the bar is on the planter pass. We've come to expect and take for granted such great visibility on the planting pass, and we can see that in so many areas, but we haven't reached that same level of visibility everywhere else on the operation. Still, there are more passes that we want to bring this insight to. For example, you might be running a wide drop application on a side dress. You might be running a drill with small grains. You might be running an air seeder or a high-speed disc with a seed box on top to put cover crop down. In all of these areas, you don't yet have that level of taken for granted visibility that you have with the planter. But we're working to change that. So last year, we introduced a new product called Clarity to bring that visibility to granular applications. It's an upgrade from the traditional blockage system, which only tells you when the product stops flowing, and instead, Clarity will tell you how much is flowing. So you can see when it starts to dip in its rate. You can also see how uniform that flow is. And this may sound like a small upgrade, but it's really not. It's a game changer because it allows us to see so much more. What about those times when you've got a partial blockage or you've got a dual product application and one of the products runs out before the other? That's what we're looking at here. This is an example from last year. A grower in Milex, Texas was running a John Deere air seeder with a 1910 air cart, and he was pulling 60% nitrogen, 40% wheat seed. And as they get to the end of the field, in this last pass, you can see the magnitude map starts to dip into yellow, starting at the left edge and moving into the right. Now, the grower knew that his seed tank was fine, so this must be the fertilizer that's running out. He takes a moment, he makes a decision. Well, I'm still putting down seed, and I'm planning to do a side dress pass coming up in the coming weeks anyway. That should cover it. It's not worth stopping. I'm just going to keep on going. It's just one pass, right? And so they get to the end of the field, and this is what they see. Beat for beat, you can see all those the towers running out. But did they make the right call? It was about evaluating your options. And Caleb was curious, so he came back a month later. Caleb was the regional manager who was there on that day, helping the grower out. And they got a drone out, and they took a look. And they found some good news and some bad news. The good news is the fertilizer plan was working great. The bad news is it didn't work where you didn't put fertilizer. Okay, but we still haven't put that side dress pass in. So the grower is going to apply side dress, some nitrogen. Hopefully that can help catch things up. Caleb says, okay, you do that. I'm going to come back next month, and we'll take another look. And he does. He comes back the next month, and it looks great on the field. They're down on the field, they're looking at it, everything's uniform. But then they get the drone out again, and guess what? It's back as clear as day, just like it was on the 2020, 2 months earlier. You can see where each tower ran out, beat for beat in the drone imagery, like you can with that 2020 map. So this is some moment where we would have lost this insight if we didn't have clarity alerting us that we had made a decision in the first place, because who would send up a drone to look at this after the field looks fine? But because we had made a decision, we can follow up and look and and see if that was the right decision for next year. And it turns out it was not the right decision. Going into the end of the year, as the crop was drying out, that one region still lagged behind. It never caught up. But the visibility we had let us see that. So the question is, the nagging question is, what happens when we don't have that visibility?
So this is one of those examples where we didn't have the visibility we wish we would have. So if you're a dealer in the room or a region manager, you know that there's this odd period of tension between when the last few planters finish and the last few fields emerge from the ground, because it's in that period of time that we get the inevitable "what happened here" questions. This was one of those examples. A neighbor, this is McLean County, Illinois, called me up spring of 2023. He said, "Eric, I know you're busy, but I have what I think is compaction on one wing of my planter in every single field that's come up. Would you be willing to come out and take a look at this with me?" And I said, "Yeah, I'd be more than happy to." He says, "The only thing that has changed between last year and this year is we added reveal to the planter. Is it possible that the internal gauge wheel on reveal could have compacted the ground on part of that planter and created an issue like this?" I explained to him why I didn't think that was likely for two main reasons. Number one, all of the air bags on that system are tied together in one line in series. So if I put one pressure down on one row, it's the same pressure all the way across. So unless there was a sag in a wing that we didn't see, this shouldn't be likely. So I said, I'd be happy to come out. I'd be happy to walk with you. So the dealer and I go out together. And we go, first of all, to the data that the planter had collected at the time of planting. The hypothesis is compaction. So where do we start? We got to go to the downforce map. This is its delta force map. Does that look non-uniform to you? No, it's actually very uniform. So very quickly, we could go through several fields and rule out, no, this doesn't look like it's a planter issue, not on the delta force side anyway. Second thing then is we've got to go out and dig roots. Is this truly compaction? So we go out into the short rows and we start digging plants. We go to the tall rows, we start digging plants, and we're looking for any evidence of a hatchet root or sizing of roots, and we didn't see anything that was compelling. What we did notice, though, was this. We had yellowing on the leaves that you couldn't see from the road yet. As we got in, we started to look at it, we started to say, this looks a lot more like a nutrient deficiency than it does a compaction issue. So how are we putting the fertility on? Well, we put on some with the planter. But here's the next thing we noticed. These rows are in groups of 5. The wing of that planter is 6 rows. It doesn't match. And none of the plumbing matched up on the planter to groups of 5. What else do you put on fertility with? And he says, we've got one other machine. He says, we're 100% liquid application. We use a fall rig, we pull in hydrous tanks, and we apply 3-18-18 and KTS alongside of that in the fall. So this is the fall rig, and as we start to go in and look at his visibility, it looks like this. There's sight gauges in groups of 2 and 3. The center of that machine, groups of 5. This was our smoking gun. So he decides to investigate a little bit further. Is this actually nutrient deficiency? The tissue tests say yes. We're low in potassium. The ears, as the season progresses on, are tipped back. They're pulling back. The yield monitor says this costs 7.5 bushel to the acre on average. At $4.20 corn, this is almost $32 an acre that he couldn't see. And so he starts to reevaluate. He said, this fall program cost me $80 an acre. And the sight gauges that I was relying on didn't tell me I had an issue. What they finally found out had happened is they had disassembled the sight gauges to clean them out, and when they reassembled them, they missed one part. It allowed the ball to float to the top, but it plugged the channel down to the ground, and so those 5 rows were completely restricted from the flow that was supposed to go in. It lied to them without knowing it. So we started to think through other options. We talked about EM flow sense. At that time, it would have cost him just under $6,300 to put that visibility in the cab instead of back on the bar. But as he calculated what it cost him, he says, I would have cash flowed that investment in 200 acres. His final decision ended up resting here. He says, I'm not going to go just with the visibility, but I need control as well. And so what you see grouped here is EM flow sense with EM HD, the controller, and they're both mounted on one plate. This allows him to move that plate from the planter along with that 2020 to the fall applicator as well to make sure that he doesn't have the issue again. He's got the full visibility and control that he needs.
So Eric and I have been talking about expecting success where you can see, but how are you supposed to see all these metrics, right? We've talked about so many metrics. We've talked about singulation, we've talked about good spacing, good ride, downforce, fertilizer magnitude, fertilizer uniformity, and now we're adding flow, and we're only halfway through the presentation. So where are we supposed to put all this? Where is the screen space to put these metrics? Well, I suppose the obvious answer is let's just go ahead and get another screen. Let's get 2 screens, let's get 3 screens, let's go ahead and make them bigger, brighter, let's go full mission control. Okay, I admit that's a bit much. But when the R&D guys get a new toy, they've got to play with it. And last year, we announced the new 16-inch monitor for the Gen 3, and they wanted to take it out. They wanted to see what it was capable of. And one thing they found is that it's actually an interesting solution to the space problem. You don't have infinite space in the cab, and it's not always possible to put a new big monitor within easy reach. But what happens if you could use your old monitor, your 10-inch monitor, to control the maps and widgets on the other one? Then you don't need to reach it. You can put that new 16-inch monitor down at your feet, up in the corner. It doesn't matter because all that matters is you can see it and you can keep your hands where you're used to them and not sacrifice that precious real estate. So now that we've got more real estate, let's go ahead and add some more metrics.
So one of the more important metrics comes out here in this example. One of the last pieces of what I've learned to expect is this. When I have the right information, I can help check my assumptions and maybe push the boundaries a little bit where I normally wouldn't. And that's what you're seeing in the example behind me. This is May 8th of just this past spring, Bloomington, Illinois. The reason I'm out with my neighbor this particular day is because he's wanting to run. He's got no corn in the ground yet. April had been a pretty cool, wet month. Average temperature, 53 degrees. We had 6 inches of rain that came through several different rain events. And so it's been weeks since he's been in the field. And so as he's surveying the ground on May 8th, he also knows that the weather forecast says we expect a 1/4 inch of rain tomorrow. 9 times out of 10, I'm going to say, hold up, just give it some time. But he makes the comment, he says, I don't think I can till it, but I wonder if I can plant it. He says, I bet I can plant it. And I smiled and I said, yeah, I think we can plant it. Here's why I made that assumption. I know his planter. This is his row unit. The first thing I know is we've got row-by-row hydraulic downforce, so we can lighten that footprint up, we can lift, we can try to tiptoe across the soil if we need to. The second thing is he's got a closing system that isn't just going to firm the soil in, but we can feather and do a little bit of tillage around that seed. I also know that he's got a row cleaner that's very easy to adjust. But the thing that was most important to me is I knew this. He takes the time every season to calibrate row 1's depth to match row 2, to match row 5, to match row 24. And the reason that mattered today is the main question on my mind that morning was, how deep do we actually need to plant this seed? How deep do we actually need to go? And here's why I'm asking the question. Think about a disc opener that's in the ground at 2 inches deep versus one that's in the ground at 1.5 inches. The deeper the disc opener goes, the wider the wedge, the higher the friction, you get the idea, right? We're going to slick that sidewall the deeper we go. So if I can come shallower, I can reduce that tendency. The next thing I know is this. In 2020 at Winter Conference, we showed this concept. A seed planted closer to the surface of the soil will accumulate heat energy faster than a seed put in the ground deeper at 3 inches. And this was the example we showed that year. A seed in the ground at 1.5 inches accumulated 176 GDUs versus one at 3 inches only accumulated 154 across the 21-day span. And the result was a more uniform stand. So how many of you agree with me? This is good in theory. Good theory. Who would say that? Okay. Who's ready to plant all your crop at 1.5 inches deep? Why do I not have more takers, right? What I hope you're thinking is this. You missed something really important. And that's this. Moisture is king. Dale Cook showed this at Winter Conference of 2017. We know that if we don't get that seed into the moisture line and we get underneath the right amount of moisture, we get variation in that emergence, and that variation leads to poor ear count. But what Dale also taught us that year is this. Sufficient moisture is a single measurable number. It's 30%. What this means is that a seed that absorbs 30% of its weight in moisture in 3 days will germinate. Fortunate for us, we've got a couple smart firmers on the planter. This actually does matter because, believe it or not, there is a field, at least one in McLean County, Illinois, that has over 50 feet of elevation change in a 1/4 mile, and we were in it. So now, is it possible that the moisture line at the top of the hill is different than at the bottom? Well, yeah, that's a very real concern. So he starts here. He plants past my son and my son and I go out and we start digging seed and exposing them in the environment that they were planted into. He came walking back to my son and the first thing I asked him, I said, do you really think we need to plant this deep? I said, you think we should shallow up a notch? I said, I say we should do 2, but instead of a debate, why don't we just try both? So we go to the left side, we shallow up 1 notch, that's a 1/4 inch. Go to the right side, we shallow up 2 notches, that's a 1/2 inch. He plants a little bit further, and then we start digging seed. This is what the seed looked like planted 1.5 inches deep. Do I have moisture? Absolutely, I have moisture. Do you see it's a little tight? It's a little damp. That's why we're doing this, right? And he makes the decision, we're staying here. But now what I know is this, as we begin to plant up that incline towards the higher part, we now have that metric of furrow moisture telling us whether or not we're getting to the edge of what's okay. But is it possible I missed something, that we didn't see it? I would say so. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have Matt walk you through how we can use Panorama to actually ground truth the decision that we made that day.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's easy to think that you're going to pay attention to every second, but there are lots of things going on in the cab, so you'll want to be able to go back and sanity check yourself. And so that's what we're going to do. We're just going to open up the field in Panorama. And the first thing I do when I'm looking at a field is I zero in on the area I care about. And Eric just told us that the area we care about are the high elevation zones. So I'm going to select those regions with the Lasso tool. And it's not because I care about the Lasso report about elevation. I mean, that's beside the point. But Panorama is going to remember that selection, so when we switch to another layer, we can keep our focus where we want it. And we don't need to remember where the high elevation zones are. So here we are. We're going to switch to furrow moisture, because that's the one we care about. And the question is, did we stay above 30%? Absolutely. Just a tiny fraction of the field is below that. All right, while we're at it, let's go ahead and drag the selection wider so we get the whole field in view and confirm that yes, everywhere, even the low regions, remained where we wanted. And they did. Perfect. So we know that we are where theory says we should be. In theory, we should have better emergence. But does reality agree? Well, to find out, we went out and we walked the field and we checked. And what we found, after looking at several hundred plants, was that absolutely, theory did agree with reality. There were 5.5% fewer emergence errors at 1.5 inches deep than at 2 1/4. And we only got the confidence to try this, to learn this, because we had that real-time visibility. And that's what we've been talking about so far, real-time, taking in all that information at once, and how that's so overwhelming that we really want to offload that responsibility to the monitor to keep track of it for us. But there are times when you need to pause and you need to make a decision. And one of those times is what we're going to look at next. It's the pre-season or pre-spray season planning. Here you're going to want to plan your herbicide program. And there's a lot of variables that go into that. You're going to care about what weeds you're dealing with. You're going to care about how big they are, how dense they are, and also what stage of growth your crop is. Because all of these things are going to play into the correct choice of an herbicide program. And the only way you can really know the answer to any of these questions is to go out and look with your eyes and see. So that's what we'll do. We'll go out scouting, the obvious thing. But that presents its own challenges. Where are we going to scout? The harsh truth is, we don't have the ability to walk every pass of every field. So how do we pick the right area? How do we approach this? We want to find the representative area. So what's the representative area? Well, what data do we have? Unfortunately, not much, right? We've got, really, we've just got experience, intuition, and a clock ticking telling us we need to get this done faster. And that ticking clock is going to tell me when I approach this field that I should just stay on the road and make a quick loop because I'm a little bit lazy. But thankfully, I wasn't the one scouting this day. Our agronomist, Aaron Herman, was out, and he knew that he could follow that railroad a little bit and get in field a little bit further, but still, time constraints forced us to stay on just a quick loop. Now, that's a reasonable approach, right? There's no reason to think that any other part of the field is any different from that part. We know it could be, but we have no reason to believe that we picked the wrong area. So how can we find some sort of data source that would tell us whether we chose the right place? Well, if you think closely about this, there's really one obvious solution. We want to go where last year's weeds were, because last year's weeds are this year's seeds. And do we have a way to figure out where last year's weeds are? We do if we have Symphony Vision installed. So Symphony Vision is keeping track of all of those weed spots, everything it sees in its vision, and it's making a map of that. So we can go back in Panorama next year and check out what the results are. We can go to where we wanted to go. And let's compare our chosen passes as a scout to what the actual weed map was. Looks like we made a bad decision. Now, this isn't just some contrived example for you guys that we made up. In fact, this is actually the route that Aaron Herman walked. And this map we're looking at is the spray pass he did after walking that. And you know, when he got into that back area, he was sweating bullets because this is not what he signed up for when he went into this field. He was not expecting to see that. But he could have gone into the pass knowing exactly what he was facing if he had had that map from last year. And next year, he will. So next year, he'll be able to scout exactly where he needs to. He can get the ATV out and go to the 2 hot spots that he cares about and ensure that he knows what he's trying to kill when he goes into the next spray pass. That's the level of visibility that we want to have to make those right decisions.
So this has been interesting to me as I've surveyed a number of growers saying, how do you approach this scouting piece? What data do you have? And they echo what Matt said. We know our fields. Well, how do we know our fields? Well, we spray them, right? Year after year after year. And there's some merit to that, but I want you to think through this with me for a moment. How focused on scouting are you when you're running the sprayer? Because my gut tells me that when we're running the sprayer, we've got 2 much bigger priorities in mind. The first priority is this: acres per hour, beat whatever kind of weather is trying to get me out of the field before I'm done with the job at hand. The second priority is don't run over a standing crop. It's pretty simple when it comes right down to it. So this story made me chuckle when I heard it because this is a real live example of that. This is from Rich, Ben, Dylan, and Mark in north central Indiana. These guys had had a couple changes in their spray operation just this past season. The first change was Mark, the sprayer operator, had decided it's time for him to step back and be the tender. It was time to let somebody else do this. Not that he hadn't earned his stripes. Mark had managed an ag chem retail location and had sprayed for years himself. So the next one in line is Dad, Rich. And Rich says, you know what? I used to spray all of the crop on the farm, but something else changed, and that was they had added a new piece of technology to the sprayer that year, Symphony nozzle control, to get all the benefits of reduced overlap and better coverage. And so he said, if there's a time for me to step back, it's when something new is put on. But you've got to know something else about Rich. Rich is the combine operator. Who is the truest critic of the sprayer operator? The combine operator. So what is Rich's key concern here? 2 new operators and a new system being learned don't run over the corn, right? Guys, we've got to run over less corn postseason. So as the story goes, pass number 1 goes pretty clean, pretty smooth. It's a burn down pass of the 18-inch tall rye cover crop that's there. The second pass goes really well with the new operators. It's a post pass, taking care of the weeds that had made it through. The third pass was unplanned. They're out scouting and they're looking and they notice that they've got a field or 2 with manganese deficiency in it. They know they want to spray it before the weather that's coming the coming week, but it's Friday afternoon and Ben and Dylan are off on Saturday. Dad doesn't want to make them come back to do the work. So Dad says, I've always sprayed in the past. I'll do it. And with a simple phone call, he says, I did, I got in, I made a phone call, Ben told me how to fire the system up, and he says, that Symphony system was sweet. Made it super easy to go out and make those passes. But he was focused on spraying. So when Ben comes into the shop on Monday morning and asks, Dad, what do the weeds look like? How are we doing with it? And he says, you know, Ben, I think it's pretty good, but honestly, I was just trying to learn the system. I wasn't paying as close attention as I really should have. Well, the third thing that changed on the operation that year was this. They added 4 Symphony Vision cameras, not the whole boom, 4 cameras. And so Ben decides to do some scouting from his armchair. So Ben can pull out his phone, and this is what Ben sees behind him. And what you'll see is we're not covering the full field, we're seeing about 40% of it. This is a 100-foot wide boom. Can you see some valuable information here? We can see most of it's clean, but we've got some heavier spots. What you're going to notice is the dots that are periodically evenly distributed through the field. The cameras are triggered to grab an image periodically to help you see the context of what's happening underneath that sprayer. And you can actually see the cover crop. You can evaluate the stand wherever you're at. Now, the next thing Ben can do is he's going to come down and change to weed severity, because this is the second thing that will automatically trigger that camera to grab an image. Where the severity gets high, we can come in and evaluate. We're switching to type, and the camera says this red area is a broadleaf. Well, let's ground truth it. Open up the picture, and it looks like we've got an outbreak here. What are we going to do? Go up to the higher spot, it's orange. The cameras say this is broadleaf and grass mixed together. So let's ground truth that image. And as you zoom in on that spot, you can see exactly what was there 2 days ago. Does Ben need to go out to the field? He can if he wants, but I think he now has the information to determine what he needs to do next. But then the last, most valuable piece of information that Ben noticed as he was scouting was this. Doesn't look like Dad's any better than the last guy at not running over the crop, right?
So that idea of armchair scouting is incredibly powerful, but it also might feel a little overwhelming. I mean, there were a lot of images on that field, and some of you might be feeling overwhelmed at the thought that you're going to have to go through and open up every field and look at every image. So I want to talk a little bit about the future we're building to make that simpler. Because those Symphony Vision cameras, they don't just see weeds, they see your crop as well. And they can notice if you have an emergence issue. They can measure your crop stand. So picture a world where we've extended the alerting powers of the 2020. The 2020 alerts when something needs to be fixed right now. We can extend that using Panorama to your whole operation to problems that need to be solved in the next days, weeks, months. So picture a world where after your sprayer is finished in a field, your phone can alert you and say, hey, you've got an emergence issue. You should follow up on this. And you can quickly flip through, see some stats about your crop stand. You can see some weed stats. That way you don't need to do that full deep dive if that's not what's interesting to you. It's still possible to do the deep dive, but we want to make sure that all that information, the quick decisions, are surfaced to you so you don't have to do that. But when you do care about the deep dive, when you do want to analyze things, what are some tools we can use to make that more efficient?
So when I think through this process of what I want to analyze is I'm going to take a tip from Stephen Covey. He says this: begin with the end in mind. So what I would pose to you is, what do you want to learn in 2025? What's something you want to observe, something you haven't seen before? And this could be any variety of things. It could be the hybrid plot that maybe you've never put in before to see how to position things differently. It might be double stack with an insecticide versus a triple stack. Is it liquid versus a broadcast? Where do we want to go with this? Now we can use the tools that are in the cab to help us along the way to get the observations that we're after. So here's the simple example that I used this last year. For me, what I wanted to see was, does emergence affect soybeans the same way that it affects corn? Pretty simple question. So I go out with my neighbor, and here's the plot that we put in. We did this as we were running, didn't take any extra time. We put in a lighter pass, we put in a middle weight pass, and we put in a heavy pass. And as we change that, what we're doing is we're changing the density of the soil around that seed so we have something to evaluate. What we found was this. That data now comes from that 2020 up to the cloud, down to my phone, and now I'm out in the field seeing exactly what I saw the day that we planted in my hand. So now as I go out and I drop flags, I can associate that to the specific spot that I'm in that field to help tie this whole picture together. And here's what we learned. Guess what? It matters, right? So you can see that when we get the downforce right to the condition, we get more soybeans up. The lighter weight left too much air around that seed, and I lost 32,000 plants right off the top. Where I went a little too heavy, I lost 7,000 plants. Follow that through and say, well, what does it do to the individual plant that came up late? This is what it looks like. At 3 days late, I gave up 14% of the weight of that plant. Where I was 9 days plus, we lost over 60% of the production on that individual plant. The last thing then I noticed was this. I know the soil density played into it, but as I'm out looking, walking, observing, I know that this particular planter doesn't have any row cleaners. It's 15 inches. That's a lot of row cleaners. It's hard to get the residue to flow through. But this is also one of the key things that was holding some of those soybeans back. And this now sets me up for a question that I want to answer in the coming season.
So one cool thing is that we actually found a grower who shared Eric's question about row cleaners and soybeans. And so he wanted to take advantage of the tools in Panorama to know just what do row cleaners, what impact do they have on soybean yield. And thankfully, Panorama does make that very easy. Panorama is built around making all yield analysis very easy. Any map or metric you're looking at, as soon as you open it in Panorama, we will show you yield by that metric, whether that's a good ride, whether that's downforce, whether that is weed severity, or in this case, crop hybrid. You can view how that metric correlates with your yield. So this grower does that. What he does is he lifts his row cleaners for a few passes, and he renames the crop hybrid in his 2020 just to make that really easy to refer back to in Panorama. And then when he opens up the crop hybrid map in Panorama, what he sees is this. At first, that looks pretty bad. It looks like we've taken a 6-bushel hit with the row cleaners. It looks like row cleaners are hurting us. But then if we think about that, if we look at it, it looks strange. That yellow region, the no row cleaner region, is like perfectly located in that field. There's no waterways nearby, there's no headlands nearby, it's just prime real estate. So what happens if we take away the advantage that gives it? What happens if we choose to select the region using Lasso just on either side of it? That will exclude that extra noise and level the playing field. And when we do that, the truth comes out. Row cleaners actually help by 3 bushels per acre. That's a huge difference, right? From 6 hurt to 3 help. And we were only able to make that quick evaluation because Panorama makes it the default. Whenever you do anything, we're trying to show you how does that affect your yield, because we know that's the primary question that you care about. And that's just one of the many features that Panorama has to help you analyze your operation. And so there may be some of you who are wondering something. You may be thinking, well, my combine doesn't have yield sense on it, or my combine still runs a Gen 2. How am I going to be able to use this power from my planting pass and my spray pass to close the loop and figure out how it all comes together? Well, we're pleased to announce for those of you who run Gen 2s that in the coming next month or two, we are going to support file uploads to Panorama using Gen 2 DAT files. So you can get the full suite, the full power of Panorama for Gen 2 data as well. And not only that, for those of you who run combines that are not compatible with YieldSense, we're working on some solutions that can get that data out of the OEM monitor and into a Gen 3 without needing a full YieldSense system, just reading off the CAN data. All of these tools are meant to make it super easy for you to get everything where you want it in Panorama so that all of these tools are at your fingertips. So that's the 3 ways that you interact with data yourself to answer the questions that you have. So far, we've been talking about me looking at the data and making a decision. But sometimes I don't know how to make the decision. Sometimes I don't know what the data means. And a good example of that is when I've got a planter down. I've got a problem in the field, so I call my dealer. The problem is, my dealer, he's going to try and guess what's wrong with my machine. He's going to bring a part out, but he might be wrong, and he might be driving 2 hours to see me. And if he's wrong, he's going to have to drive that 2 hours back and then come again. Pretty soon, the whole day is shot, and I've lost a day of planting. But if I had invited that dealer to my Panorama operation, we could have saved that trip. He could have opened up that field in Panorama, and he could have had access to the full diagnostic data on my 2020 as I saw it without needing to leave the shop. So he could have come with the right solution the first time. But it's not just about seeing what's happening right now. He gets the full view in the past as well. And that's great for those intermittent problems that they just keep happening, but you can never catch them. You want to see that moment as it's happening, but the 2020 is a live stream of data, so you're left waiting, trying to catch that one problem as it comes up again. But Panorama solves that problem by letting you time travel back, to go right to that moment where the issue occurred, so that you don't need to sit there waiting for it to happen again. But it's not just about connecting people, connecting me with my dealer, connecting me with my tech. It's also about connecting machines. We know that a lot of you run multiple combines or multiple planters, multiple sprayers in one field. And it's important that those coordinate to work efficiently. If you think about it, it seems like there should be an obvious solution, right? Each one of those 2020s is talking to Panorama about what it's doing. So why can't it also talk to Panorama to ask what everyone else is doing? Well, it can this year. We're excited to announce a new feature in Panorama called Passmaster. Passmaster is our solution for sharing data between 2020s in real time to give you that collaborative power that you expect. Let's look at it in action. So it's a little hard to see, but if you look at that 2020 monitor up there, there's actually 2 tractor icons there, and they're both painting 2 maps. One is a population map and one is a downforce map. We're getting a live view into what that other operator is seeing in his tractor just off the edge of this screen. And crucially, as we approach that other tractor's coverage, we swath off to it, as expected, as we've come to rely on. So we have that full power of data sharing, enabling smooth collaboration. And it's not limited to line of sight or to real-time interaction either. I can load up past data All that matters is that there is a connection to Panorama where Panorama knows about that data. So we made it super easy to configure on the 2020 because we want to keep you going smoothly. So even if, like me, you're not so good with naming your fields and you can't, for whatever reason, you just can't coordinate. So let's say I'm still on the default field, which I don't know how that happened, and my cousin's just randomly naming fields with some numbers because he can't figure out what to do. Doesn't matter. For the purposes of this, I can still load that data into my machine, and I can go on, we can have that shared data view. And because it's powered by Panorama, I'm not limited. I don't need extra hardware. There's no extra fees involved. I just need the power of Panorama as I already have it, which just requires a cellular connection. So if you've got a cell plan with a hotspot, perfect. We're also compatible with Starlink, but we know that some of you would prefer a more out-of-the-box solution. So we have begun work on a new product that you can buy from Precision Planting to get that connectivity out of the box without needing to do any kind of configuration. So it will just work seamlessly. And these are just some of the tools. We've only shared a few of the possibilities at hand, and I want to leave you with that as a thought as you go into the next 58 days.
So as we think through this, it's a good place to land the plane, this idea of how we share information between each other. Because when it comes down to it, I have learned more from information in the context of the advisors that I work with on a day-in, day-out basis. It is more often than not that I'll look at something and I don't know the answer, but if I can get the right information to the right person, that helps to close that loop and start to increase my understanding. And so that's what we hope we're able to do here, is get you to think through what you expect, what you want to evaluate and analyze, and do that in the context of the community of people that work with you with the goal of making 2025 as successful as we possibly can in the coming crop cycle. Thanks for joining us, everybody, and I hope you have a great rest of the day at conference.